It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. From London, we say hello to Nico Hines, world editor of The Daily Beast. How are you?
I'm very well. Good evening.
Good evening to you. Good evening as well to Sofia Amara from Beirut, senior correspondent. Your latest book, Undercover in Syria's Hell. Nice to see you.
Good evening, Francois.
We're also joined by France 24 journalist Bilal Tarabay.
Good evening.
How was your week?
Very good.
Very good.
Very good.
Okay. Was the week very good for Italian broadcaster La Rai's New York correspondent Antonio Di Bella? How are you?
Fine, thanks, Francois. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. The World This Week, where, by the way, you can tell your friends to subscribe to the podcast version on Apple Music, Spotify, and other preferred streaming services. It's the worst gunfire endured by Beirut in more than a decade. 4 hours of sustained exchanges between rooftop snipers and pro-Hezbollah demonstrators below, rallying against a magistrate's efforts to follow criminal negligence cases against officials responsible for last year's port explosion that shook Lebanon's capital to the core. If the Lebanese are spooked, it's also because it happened on what was a front line during the civil war between Christian and Shia militias. We can, Bilal Tarabay, this area where it happened was always a flashpoint between 1975 and 1990.
It was definitely the earliest front line of the civil war in 1975. I mean, 13th of April, 1975, which is considered by most as the start.
So a symbolic place.
Exactly.
We have 13 arrests after these rooftop snipers exchanged gunfire with those pro-Amal, pro-Hezbollah demonstrators. Do we know any more at this point?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's allegedly, I mean, the Hezbollah accuses the Christian right party / militia, the Lebanese forces, to have shoot on the demonstrators, but the head, the chief of the Lebanese forces denied those accusations. So at this point, we don't know. Today, the news of today is that today the Hezbollah has buried what he calls his martyrs. 7 people shot dead, I'm sorry. And he asked the Lebanese government to put an investigation to know and to catch the people that are called the so-called snipers. And there is a newspaper in Lebanon called Al-Akhbar, that is a pro-Hezbollah newspaper that has showed on its front page today the face of Samir Jarja, the head of the Lebanese forces, dressed up as Adolf Hitler with the mustache and written, "You knew what will happen."
Yeah, we've had that staunch denial by the one-time hardline Christian militia leader Samir Jarja, the 68-year-old boss of the Lebanese Forces Party, putting out a statement hours after the fighting in which he said he deplored the events, that it's the fault of the fact that there's too many weapons in the Lebanese capital. Sofia Amara, your thoughts, because we're also at the same time getting these mixed messages from Hezbollah on the one hand saying it's going to respond, but adding as well, it doesn't want to be dragged into sectarian strife. Where's it all going?
We don't know yet where it is going. Of course, each party is accusing the other of having started this these very dangerous clashes. Now, I think we will never know the truth. I've been trying since yesterday to call and get answers from the investigators inside the Army Directorate, and I got no answer because they're just, they don't feel like pointing out at a party instead of another, because that will put this party in a very difficult situation. Now, the issue is not about, having too much weapons in Lebanon or Beirut in the hand of a party of another. Of course, there are too many weapons in Lebanon, but the thing is that you have one party that is using these arms, that is heavily armed, as a way of dealing with the other political parties, as a way of discussing, and I think this is not the first time, because it happened in 2008. And to answer your question, where is it going? Back then in 2008, and it was called a coup d'etat, where you had Hezbollah, who was against a political decision, who used force, who took Beirut, tried to go and take also the Druze mountains, and then, they got what they want. And at that moment, a lot of experts, local experts, realized or said that, Lebanon realized back then that it was hostage of this way of dealing with a gun on the table. And here we are, like 12 years later, where there is a very important issue, which is the port investigation that might point out to Hezbollah and other parties that are close from Hezbollah. And now again, they're using force. Whoever started it is not an issue. Because at the end of the day, when Hezbollah says, I'm going to the street, then it is not innocent. It's not like any party going to the street. When Hezbollah was
let me
fighting
ask you about that. Let me just ask you about that, Safiya, because Samir Jaja is a man who measures his words these days. And on Wednesday, on the eve of those clashes, he put out a statement strongly denouncing the views of Hezbollah. Was that a dog whistle message to his followers to take on the Shia militia movement?
I think it was, he indeed did that. But I think it was a way, because he felt like many, because everybody knew something would happen the next day. Beirut was holding its breath. It knew wherever you stood, everybody knew that there was going to be an action against that judge that is trying to arrest some politicians that are close from Hezbollah. And you don't play with this, because we saw that with the Hariri investigation. As soon as some officers found out about the Hezbollah implication, they were killed. And I mean here Wissam Eid and Wissam al-Hassan. They were killed. They were just killed, So it's not a game. So of course, maybe Samir Jaja, he wanted to make it clear, even to Hezbollah, don't play around with us. Don't go into our neighborhoods screaming Shia, Shia, Shia. It's sectarian slogan, like, as if the port issue was a sectarian issue, as if, this judge was, aiming at the Shia as a sect. The guy is trying to do his job. We met him, and this guy is trying to do his job. And each time he does this, even the Sunni are playing this, because you had like Hariri going and saying, oh, no, don't touch the Prime Minister, Hassan Diab, who is, his political opponent, because he is a Sunni, so you should not arrest him. And each time, justice needs to be made in this country, they use this sectarian tool to prevent, justice from doing its work.
Prevent justice from happening. And yeah, as you're saying, Safiya, in the eye of the storm is this magistrate, Tarek Bitar. In the build-up to Thursday's violence, he'd asked to audition officials from across the political spectrum over that August 2020 Beirut port explosion that killed over 200, left thousands wounded. Not a popular move in certain precincts. Let's listen to what Hassan Nasrallah said before Thursday.
Firstly, I am saying to the families of the victims, if you are expecting to reach the truth with this judge, you won't. And if you are expecting to reach justice with this judge, Even with an indictment, you will not.
Antonio Di Bella, your thoughts on what we've witnessed, this conflagration, and what you just heard there from Sofia Amara, how neither side wants to be investigated.
It's a big problem, but it's also a result, in my opinion, seen from New York, from Washington, is that America is far, it doesn't want to be involved and leave all this theater alone. And so there's no backing. It's paradoxal that the Lebanon pound is connected to the dollar, to the US dollar, but there's no connection between Washington and Beirut. And that's the result of this isolation of Lebanon from the international court. And everybody's very worried of what's happening because it's the opposite of what's happening in Iraq, where something is moving in the right direction. In Lebanon, it's moving in the opposite direction.
Yeah, we did have, and it was a coincidence of the calendar, the U.S. Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland, who happened to be in Beirut when all of this was happening. But your reaction, what you just heard there from Antonio Di Bella Bilal about the fact that the international community is perhaps not addressing it the way they should?
I mean, they're trying, but they are constantly failing. That is the issue with Lebanon. I mean, Emmanuel Macron, and we all remember that he went twice in Lebanon, two times right after the explosion, with very hard words directed to the political stakeholders there. You have the US ambassador, Dorothy Oshie, who aligns most of the time with Emmanuel Macron and, let's say, the Western world idea. But the Western world, I mean, the other side, the not Iran, not the Shia world, is constantly failing to address the Lebanese crisis. And what we can say now is that there is some sort of a consensus that Lebanon is in the hands of Iran, which explain the demonstration that we've witnessed.
And the U.S. Undersecretary of State, when she goes there, she knows it, and she goes there with open eyes.
She went there to address the gas and the oil and gas issue, which is another issue.
Right, and she got surprised by what happened
exactly.
there. Nico Hines, on Sunday will be the second anniversary of these protest movements in Lebanon, calling for an overhaul and an end to the power-sharing system that's existed since 1990, where it seems from the outside that neither side is accountable. How do you go about it?
Well, I think what's going to be really important is that what happens next. And we have to wait and see what the magistrate does now. Obviously, there's been this huge flare-up, and the magistrate is now going to have to try, and it's going to be extremely difficult, try and push through and be unaffected by this, and to try and bring some element of justice here. Because what we've got ourselves into is this spiral of impunity where both sides think that they can get away with anything, which then obviously encourages corruption, because any kind of attempt at justice or attempt at an independent ruling is stymied by both sides. So somehow we're going to have to, and whether that means bringing in some expertise from abroad, perhaps that could be part of this. For example, if you're talking about the incident this week, you know, there must be video footage, there must be camera footage, there were news crews there, there was police there. You know, there is the capability amongst, say, for example,
but you heard Sofia Amara saying that they don't. You heard Sofia Amara say that they doesn't sound like they want to pursue it, even though there have been 13 arrests so far.
Well, exactly. And that's the cycle we're going to have to get out of, because otherwise this is going to spiral and spiral and spiral until there is a civil war. The only way to stop that is, and it's what people were protesting for, is to stop this this cycle that we're stuck in, and let's have a fresh start. And the only way we're going to have a fresh start is if we get an actual sense of justice from, and it has to start with, how do we deal with what happened this week? We need to find the people who fired the shots. They must be on camera. You know, it's possible to find these people, to put them on trial, to send them to jail. And the same with the port explosion. We need to get people held to account behind bars, and then we try and move on.
All right, over in Iraq, they also launched an anti-corruption, pro-reform movement 2 years ago. And there, too, it's been an uphill battle. The best they got was a general election. It was brought forward by 6 months. And while many of those who braved bullets to demand change voted with their feet, turnout last Sunday dropped to 41%. Those who did cast ballots, as Antonio Di Bella pointed out, did move the needle slightly. They booted out pro-Iran candidates. The big winner, the one-time nemesis of the United States, populist cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, he celebrated with a promise.
We won't allow parties to take control of public money and resources. That is for the people. Every corrupt person will be held accountable, whoever they are. Whoever they are.
Safi Amara, your reaction to what you heard there from Muqtada al-Sadr and to what Antonio Di Bella said. In Lebanon, it's frozen. In Iraq, at least it's moving slightly.
Yeah, and this is totally amazing, you know, because in Iraq, where you have a majority of Shia community, things are moving, and it's really a setback for pro-Iranian parties. I mean, Muqtada Sadr, of course, was against the U.S. occupation, but also against the Tehran occupation, if I may say. Here, it is a total setback, especially for the Hashd al-Shabi, the popular mobilization that has been, you know, building on the fact that it has been fighting against ISIS, which is the total evil, and it is, of course, evil. But yet, they lost, you know, like 30 seats, 30 MP seats. So this is a very good. I was there when the riot started in 2019, and it was really violent. I mean, I saw young people shot at, by snipers in Baghdad, in the south where you had this Shia young population, you know, even burning the Iranian consulates. I mean, this is incredible. Yet in Lebanon, where, you know, Shia population are only, let's say, maybe 30% of the population, where you have Christian, where you have 18 sects. And despite the fact that the Shia are not a majority, it is the country where the Iranian influence is at its best. Despite the fact that the country is totally collapsing, there is no more state, or almost so. And here in Lebanon, it is where Iranian is the most influent, where it is the farthest country from Tehran. And this is really amazing. And Lebanese are far, far away from being done with it. And I do not believe that there will be any justice either in the clashes of yesterday of the port, because there is something that this judge must have found out, that Hezbollah and Amal, the two strong and armed Shia militia, do not want people to discover. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done what happened yesterday.
Let me turn to the Lebanese in the room here. Bilal Tarabay, when you compare what's happened in the last week in Lebanon, what's happened in the last week in Iraq, what conclusion do you draw?
No, I mean, I don't draw any conclusion because in Lebanon, we are supposed to have election next year. So it's just a matter of calendar. But this is a very good case to compare what Sofia was talking about, the Shia community. You have to know that the cousin of Muqtada al-Sadr, father, is the founder of Lebanese party that will become Amal. So that puts you on the map, the fact that the Shias in the Arab world are in several countries. Like the same family can be in several countries. That's first. Second, in Iraq, the narrative of the Shia people there is not the narrative of a victim. I mean, they've passed that since the fall of Saddam Hussein. In Lebanon, they still do have this narrative of being always the victim. Yesterday, before, even today, we have been shot at, and the world is not doesn't care. So in Iraq, the fact that the narrative is not that they are the victims allow them to have different branches. You have the national Shias by Muqtada Sadr. You have the Tehran-backed Shias with Hashd al-Shabi. And I want to add that in Tehran, in Iraq, that's the first election after the revolution, right?
Of 2019.
Of 2019. And you have 20 to 25 new MPs that are from new parties that have emerged after this revolution. So it gives us maybe a clue on what can happen also in Lebanon next year if election will happen.
So things moving in Iraq, are they moving around the globe? We have an energy crisis on our hands these days. More on that when we come back in The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast world editor Nico Hines joins us from London. From Beirut, reporter Sofia Amara, your latest book, Undercover in Syria's Hell. It's published in French. France 24 journalist Bilal Tarabeh is with us. And from New York, RAI correspondent Antonio Di Bella. Seems like the whole planet wants to go full throttle with its recovery at the same time. And in this era of privatized energy sectors and taut supply chains, all of it takes is, for instance, some maintenance on Norwegian gas, power outages in China and India. And suddenly, well, the whole world's competing for the same resources, the same goods at the same time.
We are witnessing an unsustainable economic recovery here. We see that the fossil fuels are growing very strongly. The prices are high, putting a brake on the economic growth. And at the same time, this year, we are seeing the second largest increase in the global emissions in the history.
An unsustainable recovery, Antonio Di Bella.
Well, I see Russia behind some of this. Obviously, they didn't provoke the crisis, but they are trying to exploit it for political reason, first. And second, I think of this crisis as a threat to the climate battle for the change, because some states could resort to the old-fashioned production, polluting more and slowing down the process for the climate change. That's my opinion.
Well, let's listen to Vladimir Putin. The message from the Russian president this week was, hey, Europe, don't blame us if you were scrambling for gas. You could have bought your natural gas and stockpiled it instead of leaving it late and gambling on the spot market.
I will repeat, the increase of gas prices in Europe was a consequence of electric power shortages and not vice versa. And as we say here, they should not lay the blame at someone else's door, which is what some of our partners are trying to do. Sometimes, as you listen to what is being said in this regard, you're simply surprised.
So, Antonio, you hail from one of the few countries on this continent that does have stockpiles of natural gas. Is Vladimir Putin right?
Well, he's right in saying that it's not fault of Russia on this race, but it's pushing. It's pushing, and then the Stream 2 channel between Russia and Europe is important. They want to push it against the states, and in some way, Biden bowed to relaxing the measure against America and against Europe. I think in this moment, Russia and Putin have upper hand in a crisis that help Moscow more than London.
All right. On Wednesday, the White House announced that the Port of Los Angeles, gateway to Chinese goods, would go to 24-hour-a-day operations. That's because you've had an energy crisis and this backlog of containers waiting to clear customs as orders come in from all places. Joe Biden also bringing in representatives of retailers like Walmart, logistics firms like UPS and FedEx, and electronic supplier Samsung. And by the way, it's not just LA. The whole world is suffering similar supply chain issues. Here you see a map with all the backlogs and how long it takes to clear customs in everywhere from Shenzhen all the way to Rotterdam. one place in particular I know that's near and dear to Nico Hines' heart, Dateline, the North Seaport of Felixstowe. That's on the eastern coast of England, and we've seen some impressive images there. We were talking about this subject a few weeks back and talking about all of the post-Brexit hiccups. But when you see those images of all those containers, of course, it's not just Britain.
It's not just Britain. No, we're feeling it worse because we've got a whole set of other issues on top of what the rest of the world is having to deal with. But it goes back to that first clip that you showed. The entire world has been absolutely humbled, laid low by this pandemic, and everybody is rushing back to life. And there just isn't enough of everything to go around while everyone rebuilds at the same time. There's too much pent-up demand and too much struggle. And it's really worrying looking ahead of what's going to happen over the next sort of winter months in the Northern Hemisphere, because it's going to be a lot colder. We're going to need a lot more energy. And then you've got things that seem silly but are actually going to, bite hard in people's lives. And you talk about things like the festive season, and we're not going to be able to get the Christmas presents we want. We're not going to be able to get the supplies we need for that long-awaited Christmas after the pandemic is looking like it's under threat again.
Looking like it's under threat again. Some have billed this, Nico, as the first crisis of the energy transition age. But of course, at that same press conference, the head of the international agency said that when it comes to energy transition, the glass is 80% empty, and that we haven't been investing what's needed to start going to renewables.
Oh, I thought you were going to play a clip there. It's the same problem that comes up all the time with these climate issues, is that we know that there are these problems coming in 5-10 years, and everyone's talked about it. It's out in the open. And yet no one's doing anything about it. It's the same issue with the electric cars. People in Britain, I think it's 2035, you're only going to be able to buy electric cars. But if they suddenly brought that in, there's going to be nowhere to charge your cars. There isn't enough electricity in the system for everybody to use their electric cars overnight. And so nobody ever seems to put in the planning that goes ahead. And it's exactly the same with this power system. And do you know what they've just done in Britain? We've switched back on our coal power stations, which had been off. And so come next month, when the whole world flies into Glasgow for the COP26 meetings, which is supposed to set the climate agenda for decades to come, it's looking like that whole summit, all the lights, all the power, all the events are all going to be coal-powered.
Wow. Your reaction to that, Sophia Amara?
Well, seen from Beirut, this energy crisis due to the global recovery, everybody's rushing back to life, is at the same time funny and sad because, Lebanese have been going through increase of prices, estimated sometimes at 400%. For all the goods they're using, because Lebanese are consuming, are importing 85% of what they consume. Same for, gas, same for oil, same for their cars. The cars, sometimes you cannot use your car anymore because there was not enough gasoline, etc., etc. At the same time, when the world is recovering from the pandemic, today, the Lebanese have nothing to recover because the country is under total collapse. The shops, the economy is totally down. Poverty is now touching more than 80% of the population. So this increase is not a good sign at all. They have to face increase in everything they consume, even bread and food and even children milk. But today, it's not because they're recovering. No, it's just because their money or the Lebanese lira is collapsing, as well as their country, as their state, and then they have to pay everything twice, 3 times, 4 times more than before. But there is no horizon at all whatsoever.
And so a crisis not born of abundance. It was the hardest hit country at the outset of the COVID pandemic, Italy taking no chances. And as of this Friday, in a nation where 86% of the population over the age of 12 has at least one COVID jab, it's mandatory to show proof of vaccination if you want to go to work. That has sparked protests. There are holdouts, anti-vaxxers protesting in several cities again this Friday. They tried to block the ports of Trieste and Genoa. They seemed unsuccessful in that endeavor. But like in many places around the globe, they say it's a question of freedom.
Me and all my workers are vaccinated, but for our own personal interests, not because of politics or anything.
All right, that was one person saying that he was basically trying to stay out of politics. It's interesting, Antonio Di Bella, listening to some of the rhetoric of the anti-vaxxers who've been very vocal. I know there are fears of scuffles on Saturday when there's a rally of both anti-vaxxers and anti-fascist protesters. Their rhetoric is that mandatory vaccines is something that would have happened under Mussolini.
Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, a lot of people who make rally and are violent are fascist, and they protest against their ideal leader, Mussolini. Remember that they are vocal, but they are a minority. 85% of the Italians have been vaccinated. One of the highest percentage, much higher than here in America. And so these people are violent, are vocal, but are a clear minority. The majority, overwhelming majority of the Italians want to get back to work safe with the vaccination.
Bilal Tarabeh, we spent all summer here in France covering these anti-vax protests. They were very loud, right. But it's always a question of if you're loud, does that make you necessarily representative of the broader population? It's a tricky one.
I don't think so. Since like our friend just said, the vast majority of the population, even here in France, is vaccinated. So the people that are protesting, they are definitely not the majority of people. That's first. Second, through history, this is not the first time that you have an anti-vax movement. I've read the story about this doctor in the US early in the 20th century that was against the vaccine against the variole. How would you say that in English, the variole?
It was not yellow fever, but...
some sort of. Anyway, so he covered himself...
Chickenpox.
Thank you, Sophia. So he covered himself with fungus, with the miasm of someone that was sick, and then he went to play poker with his friend just to make a point that even though he was not vaccinated, he was not transmitting the disease. So anyway, a lot of times...
Does history say whether they got the chickenpox?
No, the history doesn't say. But I mean, so they are definitely not the majority. And as well from a Lebanese point of view, because I can't forget that I'm Lebanese, seeing that countries where you have the science, where you have the money, where you have the technology, where you have the government to implement such a health program, is kind of weird to see people that are refusing this. And I'm going to finish by this one. As I was in a taxi, like a lot of persons, the driver was from Vietnam. And he was saying exactly like that. Send us our vaccine if you don't want them, because down there in Vietnam, we do need them.
All right, the Daily Beast reminding us this week that vaccines work, with numbers of cases plummeting, Nico Hines, since Israel opted for booster shots back in July. Let me ask you, Nico, talking about the prospect of the COVID pandemic coming to an end, does that jinx us? Does that set us up for failure here?
I'm not worried about jinxing. I think we all need a little glimmer of hope, and this is giving us a glimmer of hope. Now, there are potential downsides in that, yes, these third booster jabs seems to be making a big difference, but what will that be looking like in, say, 2 or 3 months? Do we already need a fourth booster jab? Do we already need a fifth booster jab early next year? So it's not necessarily an end to the problem, but I do think that there is a glimmer of hope that we could finally get this under control. But then, of course, that's only theoretical for most of the world, and this still needs to be rolled out in a huge way across the globe. But at least there's the prospect that we might be seeing a tiny, tiny glimmer of hope.
A tiny glimmer of hope. And what's the view in London when you see the Italians saying, look, if you want to show up for work, the COVID health pass is mandatory?
Yeah, it's strange because the infection numbers are shooting back up again over here, but no one's paying any attention whatsoever. Everybody is completely back into the swing of the old world. If you go on the tube, I'd say maybe a third of people are wearing a mask. It varies depending on the time of day. But if you go into a shop or a restaurant or a cafe or a bar, nobody's wearing a mask. Everybody's pretending that the world has moved on. No one's checking anyone's vaccine passport. So it does seem very heavy-handed, what's happening in Italy. But at the same time, you know, perhaps Italy will be the ones laughing when they get to have a nice Christmas at the end of the year, and we'll be back in lockdown again over here.
Oh, dear, I hope that's not the case. Finally, what is civilization coming to? France may be the land of 1,000 cheeses, but the dairy industry's chagrined to announce that on this side of the Alps, more consumers in September bought mozzarella from Italy than good old smelly Camembert from Normandy.
Est-ce que vous êtes plutôt mozzarella ou camembert?
Mozzarella, définitivement.
Mozzarella.
Camembert.
Plutôt mozzarella en salade et plutôt camembert à tartiner.
Le camembert, moi, je le prends à la fin du repas.
Oh dear. Antonio Di Bella, what's going on here? Why are we being polluted by mozzarella?
Polluted? It's a wrong word. I mean, civilized. No, I could be proud of mozzarella, but I want to confuse to my friend, because I think this is another effect of the lockdown, of the restaurant closed for COVID. You eat more camembert at the end of a nice lunch or dinner in a restaurant. And since most of the restaurants were closed, I think this is the reason why camembert went down and mozzarella used more home when you cook home and you buy in the supermarket went up. I can foresee coming back of the camembert with the opening of the restaurant and this at least to be even. I prefer in any case eat mozzarella home and some camembert when they go in a nice French restaurant, even here in New York.
Well, your optimism may be overinflated because the amounts of Camembert being consumed in France have been going down by 3% a year steadily. I guess people are moving away from fattier cheeses. But it's also a tale of globalization, Bilal Tarabai. People are...
You know what, when you talk to me about this very topic, I've realized that I myself was buying mozzarella more frequently than camembert. So right when we finish, I will go buy myself a nice, softy, smelly camembert because I miss it. But to come back to your point, I guess so. I guess that mozzarella is perceived as a more healthy, non-smelly, less fatty kind of cheese, and easier to, not to cook, but to put on as salads and all. So it's more, let's say, handy for busy people, busy society.
Sophia Mara, are we more and more in the future just going to basically eat the same stuff all around the world?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, mozzarella is an easier product to use and to in your cooking, in your kitchen, in this busy society, as Bilal said. And in Lebanon, we had both. We still have both, mozzarella but camembert. In Christmas in Lebanon, last Christmas, it was really a sad scene. In all the big supermarkets, you used to see all kind of camembert because the Lebanese are very keen on French and not Italian, French cheeses. And you could see that, last year, because it has become a luxury good, you couldn't find any I mean, you had to call friends and have them deliver when they come to Beirut to spend Christmas, to bring cheese with them, because this is part of the stuff that Lebanese cannot afford anymore, because to buy one Camembert, they need to pay half of their salary. And that was really sad last Christmas. And I think this Christmas is just going to be just the same and maybe even worse. And they can't even afford, Lebanese cheese, which is, a catastrophe for them.
Oh, you're the second panelist to broach worries over Christmas. Nico Hines, of course, with the Camembert, in Britain, they only want the one with the raw milk, right?
Do you know what? As a British person, I don't even know what you're talking about. I think what I would say on this is that, look, as a nation that hasn't always been famed for its food, we have grown healthier and we have become more tolerant and global looking by welcoming in foods from all over the world. So I feel like, the French shouldn't worry about it, and let's relax and let's share each other's, the highlights from each other's world.
All right, we'll try not to get the jitters when we tuck in. Nico Hines, I want to thank you so much for joining us from London. Antonio Di Bella in Rome, Sofia Amara in Beirut, Bilal Tarabai, thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.